She stared at the pregnancy test in shock and silence, checking it over and over again to make sure her eyes weren't deceiving her. Letting out a heavy sigh, she didn't know whether to feel happy for her child or sad because her husband didn't care about her to begin with. Their marriage was forced. She placed the small device on the table and walked toward the wardrobe to change her clothes before heading out to meet her mother. She entered the bathroom just as her husband stepped into the bedroom. Mark froze when he heard the sound of running water, realizing she was in the shower. He stood still, his eyes falling on the pregnancy test on the table. He picked it up and stared at it in silence. She stepped out of the bathroom, a towel wrapped around her body, but froze in place when she saw the test in his hand, and the shock on his face as he looked at her. There was a tense silence between them, and for some reason, she felt like crying. She stood there and waited as his gaze moved down her body, and when it returned to her face, she saw something in his gaze that surprised her. "Say something," she muttered nervously. He was still holding the test in his hand, his expression inscrutable, and he continued to stare at her in silence. His gaze shifted to her bare legs, and she clenched the towel tighter around herself. "Mark." Her voice was so soft, barely above a whisper, but it cut through the tense atmosphere. He took a couple of slow steps toward her, his eyes meeting her. She could feel her heart racing as he came to stand in front of her, lifting her chin with his fingers to make her look at him. "When were you going to tell me?" His voice was low and husky, sending a shiver down her spine. She was at a loss for words, the situation feeling more surreal by the second. His thumb brushed her lower lip, and she had to fight the urge to close her eyes and lean into his touch. A touch she hadn't felt in months. "I just found out myself," she said, her voice barely audible. He moved even closer to her, their bodies almost touching. She could feel the heat radiating off of him, and her skin tingled from the proximity. His scent enveloped her, making it difficult to think straight. She tried to keep her composure, but it was getting harder each passing second. He continued to stare at her, his gaze roaming freely across her face and down her neck, to where the towel covered her bare chest. She swallowed hard, her cheeks flushing as his eyes lingered longer than they should have. She took a step back, trying to put some distance between them, but he followed her, his hands coming up to rest on her hips. He pulled her closer and she gasped softly, feeling the heat of his body against hers. He leaned in, his lips grazing her ear, his breath brushing her skin. She looked up at him, meeting his gaze, trying to read the emotions on his face. "Really?" The words slipped out before she could stop it, and she felt a pang in her chest at how much she craved his approval. He released her hips and lifted her chin with his fingers once more, forcing her to keep looking at him. His expression remained stoic, but she noticed the intensity in his eyes. "I'm not unhappy," he said simply, his voice low and soft. She nodded but found it hard to believe him. He hadn't even touched her in months, let alone show any kind of affection. He ran his thumb over her lower lip once more, and she found herself leaning into his touch, seeking more even though she knew she shouldn't. She looked at him with surprise, her heart thudding in her chest. She knew she had said those things to her mother, but it was because he was so distant and cold, making her feel unwanted and unappreciated. She found it hard to believe what he was saying, that he had been falling in love with her, because his actions had proved otherwise. He narrowed his eyes skeptically, tilting his head slightly. "What do you mean?" he asked, his hand still holding her chin. She swallowed nervously, trying to come up with a believable excuse. "I was just complaining to my mother about something else," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He studied her face for a moment, searching for any signs of dishonesty. He knew she was lying, but he couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope that it hadn't been about him. He immediately noticed her wince, and his expression became riddled with concern. "What's wrong?" he asked, his grip on her hips tightening. She shook her head, trying to act nonchalant. "It's nothing. Just a small cramp." She was taken aback by his words, her heart fluttering at his unexpected confession. "You love me?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. He closed the remaining distance between them, their bodies now touching as he spoke, his face so close that she could feel his breath on her skin. "Yes," he said, his lips hovering near hers. "I've been a complete fool, but I've started to realize my feelings for you, and now, with the baby, I can't deny it any longer." She couldn't help but feel a surge of hope in her chest, though a small part of her couldn't quite believe his words. "You should have said something earlier," she murmured, her hands moving to his chest. He chuckled softly, his hands moving up her back. "I know I was stupid. I was afraid of my own feelings, and I thought pushing you away would make it easier." His eyes searched hers as he continued. "I was wrong. I don't want to push you away anymore. I want you, and I want the baby." She felt a mix of emotions coursing through her. Disbelief, hope, and a deep longing. She wanted to believe him, to trust his words, but she was scared. "Mark, do you mean it?" she asked, her eyes locking with his. "Because I don't want you to say these things and then change your mind." He shook his head, a look of sincerity in his eyes. "I mean it, I promise. I've been an idiot, but I want to make things right. I want to be the husband and father you deserve." His fingers traced her jawline softly as he spoke, and she found herself leaning into his touch. "And I want to show you how I feel," he continued, his voice dropping to a huskier tone. She felt her heartbeat quicken as he pulled her even closer, his body practically molding against hers. "I want to make you feel how much I love you, how much I want you," he murmured, his lips hovering near her ear. The towel dropped to the floor, leaving her completely bare before him. She felt a shiver run down her spine as he looked at her, his gaze roaming over her body. She was vulnerable and exposed, her emotions raw and conflicted. Mark ran his fingers along her jawline, his touch both gentle and possessive. She closed her eyes, her body reacting to his touch, a strange mix of desire and fear coursing through her veins. She couldn't help but crave his touch, to feel his love and affection, but she was still hesitant, still guarded. He placed a soft kiss on her jawline, his lips traveling down to her neck, leaving a trail of kisses and gentle nips along her skin. She inhaled sharply, her head tilting to the side, giving him better access. She was torn between her head and heart, between the rational part that warned her not to trust him and the part that longed for his love and affection. Her hands moved to his hair, tangling in the soft strands as he continued his trail of kisses, slowly moving down her chest. His mouth found her collarbone, and he traced it with his tongue, his breaths hot against her skin. Her body was responding to him, despite her conflicted emotions, and she couldn't help but let out a soft moan.